The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Ruth Mensa stepped into the sleek marble hallway of Lee Group's top floor. Her heels clicked too loudly against the polished floor, a sharp reminder that she didn't belong here. Not among the quiet luxury of glass walls, curated art pieces, and assistants who looked like they'd stepped straight out of glossy magazines. A sharply dressed secretary rose from behind a minimalist desk. Without a smile, she gestured toward the double doors at the end of the hall. "Mr. Lee will see you now." The boardroom beyond was vast, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Seoul skyline in a wash of gold light. At the head of the long table sat Daniel Lee, the man whose name was whispered in both admiration and fear across the fashion and business worlds. He glanced up from his sleek tablet, his dark eyes assessing her with the precision of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. "Miss Mensa." His voice was low, clipped. "Sit." Ruth smoothed her suit, willing her heart to slow, and lowered herself into the leather chair opposite him. "I'll be direct," Daniel said, setting the tablet down. "Your fashion label is struggling." The words landed like a slap, but she met his gaze. "We've had a rough season. It happens in this industry." He leaned back, the faintest shadow of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Rough season? You're over 120 million in debt. Suppliers are threatening lawsuits. Investors are pulling out." Her nails pressed into her palm. "If you called me here just to gloat, I can find the door myself." Daniel ignored the jab. "I'm offering you 10 million a month." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You'll be my fiancée," he said, as casually as if discussing the weather. "Public appearances, private weekends when required, and eventually a wedding." She let out a sharp laugh. "You're insane." His expression didn't change. "It's a business arrangement. I need the image of stability for an upcoming merger. My grandfather insists the next chairman must be married, or at least appear to be. I have no interest in an actual marriage, but I require someone who can play the role convincingly." "You're suitable." "Suitable?" she repeated, incredulous. "You're independent," Daniel said, his gaze flicking over her in cool appraisal. "Elegant enough for the tabloids, unknown enough to avoid scandals. And most importantly, you're in no position to refuse me." Her pride bristled. "You think I'm desperate?" "I know you are," he said flatly. "But you're also smart enough to see the opportunity. 10 million a month could pay off your debts and keep your brand alive. At the end, you walk away richer and free." It was madness, but madness that could save her life's work. She refused to let him see her hesitation. "And the rules?" she asked. "No feelings," he replied without pause. "No intimacy. This is a contract, nothing more. 6 months. 6 months of pretending to be madly in love with a man I barely know," she murmured. He arched an eyebrow. "I'm not that hard to love." She smirked faintly. "We'll see about that." The week that followed blurred into fittings, joint interviews, and carefully staged photographs. Daniel was infuriatingly composed at all times, charming to cameras, cold in private. They spoke only when necessary, until the Lee Group charity gala. Ruth stepped onto the red carpet in a champagne silk gown, cameras flashing wildly. Daniel's hand rested lightly at her back, a move that looked protective to the world but felt like control to her. A rival designer, Minji Lee, intercepted them with a smile dripping venom. "Daniel, darling, I didn't realize you were diversifying your tastes," Minji said, her gaze sweeping over Ruth with calculated dismissal. Before Ruth could respond, Daniel's voice cut in, smooth and lethal. "Careful, Minji. Insult my fiancé again, and I'll pull my investment from your spring line." Minji's smile faltered. She muttered something and slipped away. "You didn't have to do that," Ruth murmured. "Yes, I did," he said, eyes forward. "No one disrespects you while you're mine." Something in her chest tightened at the quiet steel in his voice. Later, she found herself laughing, genuinely, when Daniel leaned down to make a razor-sharp comment about an overly pompous guest. For a moment, the walls between them thinned, and it felt dangerously real. When the night ended, he walked her to her car. "You did well tonight," he said softly. "So did you." They stood there for a beat, the city lights painting silver edges on his face, making him look less like the cold air and more like a man. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Miss Mensa." In the car, her phone buzzed. Daniel had sent a text. "The press will have a field day with tonight's photos. Expect questions tomorrow. Keep your answers vague but affectionate." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "I know how to play my role, Mr. Lee." "Good. And Ruth?" She waited, curiosity tightening in her chest. "Yes. "You looked beautiful tonight." She read it twice, heat creeping up her neck before she finally typed, "Thank you." Inside her apartment, she kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. The silk gown still carried his cologne, clean, sharp, with a darker undertone. She told herself it was just fatigue. But deep down, she knew better. If he could make her feel this unsettled after 1 week, what would 6 months do to her? And somewhere in the back of her mind, she already feared the answer. By the second week, the rules of their arrangement were already shifting. Ruth hadn't planned on moving into Daniel's luxury apartment, but his publicist made it sound non-negotiable. "A real engagement means living together," she'd said briskly, already arranging for Ruth's clothes to be delivered. Now, mornings began with the quiet hum of the coffee machine in the sleek open kitchen, and nights ended with Daniel's low, steady voice drifting in from the balcony as he took late calls. She told herself she could keep her distance, that the marble floors, glass walls, and perfectly tailored suits were just part of the scenery. But distance blurred whenever he paused on his way to a meeting, glancing at her sketches with genuine curiosity. "You changed the neckline on that gown," he remarked one night. "The original felt too forced. This way, the fabric falls naturally." His gaze followed the lines she'd drawn. "It's softer." She arched a brow. Was that a compliment? He had a faint smirk on his face as he said, "Don't get used to it." Meals became an unspoken habit. Shared takeout boxes, wine over paperwork, and once Daniel cooking ramen in shirt sleeves, looking almost ordinary. One evening, over steaming bowls, his tone shifted. "When I was a kid, my grandfather told me I'd inherit Lee Group no matter what. I didn't get to choose my friends, my hobbies, even who I dated. Every move was strategic." "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, eyes on his bowl. "People see the power, not the weight. Then why agree to this merger? Why give in to your grandfather?" His gaze locked on hers. "Because sometimes pretending is easier than bleeding for every inch of freedom." The words stayed with her for days, making it harder to separate their staged life from whatever this was becoming. The shift came after a press conference. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and Daniel's hand rested at the small of her back, steady. "Can we get a kiss?" a reporter called out. Daniel's arm tightened. "We don't." He stopped, met her eyes, and something flickered. He leaned in. It was meant to be for show. But when his lips brushed hers, the crowd faded away. There was only warmth, the clean scent of his cologne, and the steady beat of his heart under her palm. When he pulled back, his expression was unreadable, except for the way his hand lingered at her waist, a heartbeat too long. That night, Ruth lay in bed, fingertips brushing her lips. Dangerous, how easy it had been to forget the cameras. A week later, her phone lit up. It was Yuna. "Ruth, you're in Korea? Why didn't you tell me?" "I've been busy," Ruth said, smiling despite herself. "Tomorrow. Same cafe near the university." "Sure." What Ruth didn't know was that Yuna Park, her old roommate from fashion school, was Daniel's ex. The next afternoon, they hugged in the cafe's corner, laughing over lattes. "So," Yuna teased, "this mysterious fiancé, rich, handsome? Treats you well?" Ruth smiled. "He's complicated." Outside, Daniel stepped in from the street, scrolling his phone, and froze. "Yuna." Recognition struck like a blade. Daniel's jaw clenched as he stepped out into the street, the cool air doing nothing to settle the storm building in his chest. Yuna's presence was never accidental. She moved like a chess player, every step deliberate, every smile a trap. He slid into the back of his car, his driver glancing at him in the mirror. "Home, sir?" "Yes," Daniel said sharply. Then he continued. "Find out when Yuna Park returned to Seoul, and who she's been meeting." The driver nodded, pulling into traffic. Daniel leaned back, phone in hand, his thumb hovering over Ruth's number. He wanted to call her, warn her. But if he sounded alarmed, she'd know there was something to hide, and Yuna would win before the game even began. Inside the cafe, Ruth was laughing at something Yuna had just said, the easy warmth between them exactly the kind of image Yuna would exploit. She had no idea that every word being exchanged was a thread, carefully woven into a snare that could pull both her and Daniel under. By the time Ruth finally stepped out into the afternoon sun, Yuna at her side, Daniel was already planning his next move. Yuna had returned for a reason. And if she was starting with Ruth, then that reason was him. That evening, the city was draped in gold and violet as Daniel stood in the glass-walled office of the penthouse, his jacket tossed carelessly over the back of his chair. The hum of his computer filled the otherwise quiet room, broken only when his phone buzzed with a secure call from his head of security. She's been back for 4 days, the voice reported. Checked into the Loom Hotel under her real name. She met with your stepbrother and now Ruth. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. And her reason for coming back? Officially none. Unofficially. I'd guess she's here to make trouble. Daniel ended the call without responding. Trouble was an understatement. Yuna never did anything without a goal. And if she had already found Ruth, it meant she had one card she was eager to play. He leaned over his desk, scrolling through the merger's latest reports, forcing himself to focus. But all he could see in his mind was Ruth's smile across that cafe table, directed at Yuna. The soft click of heels drew his attention. Ruth stood at the doorway, a sketchpad tucked under her arm. She hesitated before stepping in. You're still here. I thought you had an early dinner with your grandfather. I postponed, Daniel said, keeping his tone neutral. She tilted her head slightly. Is everything all right? Yes, he answered too quickly, then added, just business. Her eyes searched his face, the way she always seemed to do when she felt something was off. You sure? You look tense. He forced a faint smile. That's just my natural state. She didn't laugh. Instead, she stepped closer, resting her sketchpad on his desk. You know, if you ever need to talk about something that's not a contract or a profit margin, I'm a decent listener. For a moment, he almost told her. Almost. But the image of Yuna's sly smile stopped him cold. Go work on your designs, he said instead, softer this time. I'll be out in a bit. Ruth nodded, but the slight furrow in her brow lingered as she turned and left the room. Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze following her until she disappeared down the hall. Whatever Yuna's game was, he'd have to end it before Ruth realized she was a piece on the board. Yuna did not give him a chance because the next day, she called Ruth again. The following morning, Ruth's phone buzzed as she sketched by the window, the city still wrapped in soft morning haze. The name on the screen made her pause. Yuna. She answered. Hello. Ruth. Yuna's voice was warm, almost too warm. I've been thinking about yesterday. There's something I didn't tell you. Can we meet again? Same place. It's important. 15 minutes later, Ruth stepped into a quiet cafe. Yuna sat in the corner in a fitted black dress, hair perfect, smile precise. Thanks for coming, Yuna said smoothly, gesturing to the seat across from her. She folded her hands, then met Ruth's eyes. Daniel and I, we were lovers. 2 years. Ruth's breath caught. You what? Yuna's gaze softened, but her words cut clean. We met when I was building my brand. He was everything, charming, ambitious, generous. Until he decided I wasn't useful anymore. His grandfather dangled a faster climb if he aligned with a different woman, so he cut me off like I was nothing. No explanation. No closure. Just gone. Ruth shook her head, trying to keep her voice steady. You're saying he. I'm saying, Yuna leaned in, voice dropping. Daniel only pretends to love when it serves him. And now, you're the purpose. You're here to make him look stable, so he can get that merger. The moment you stop being useful, he'll walk away, just like he did with me. Ruth left the cafe feeling as if the ground had tilted under her. By the time she reached the penthouse, her chest was tight with anger. Daniel was in the living room, flipping through reports. We need to talk, she said, sharp. He looked up. What happened? I just had coffee with Yuna, she said, arms crossed. She told me everything. That you were lovers. That you broke her heart to get ahead. Daniel's expression didn't change. She's not lying about some parts. I did use her to climb positions, but I never broke her heart or dumped her. She fell in love with my stepbrother and ended things with me. Ruth stared at him, stunned. Then tell me the real reason you approached me with that contract. And don't say it was because I needed help with my boutique, because I know that wasn't your real agenda. Daniel was silent for a moment, his gaze dropping. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. At first, my real agenda was to use you to get back at her for breaking up with me. I knew you were friends with her, and I wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me. But during the time we've been together, I realized I feel something for you. I'm not sure what it is, but I scrapped that agenda a long time ago. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. So that's what I was to you, a weapon for revenge. I know it was wrong. Back then, I wasn't thinking straight. But now, I'm different with you. Her eyes flashed. Do you hear yourself? You admit you used me, and you expect me to believe you've suddenly changed? I am different with you, he said, his eyes searching hers desperately. Not enough, she whispered, brushing past him toward her room. Daniel stood frozen, watching her walk away, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. Over the next week, she avoided him whenever she could. Without his quiet backing and the public appearances, her business began to slip, suppliers hesitating, investors pulling out. One evening, the security guard handed her a plain envelope. She took it to the kitchen, tore it open, and a folded note slid out. The handwriting was elegant, unmistakable. End it. Make him lose the merger by ending the fake relationship. Daniel will fall with it. He'll lose his position as CEO and any chance at becoming chairman. You'll get your freedom, and you won't keep being used and tossed aside once he gets the chairmanship role. Yuna. Ruth's hands trembled as she read the note. Walking away would protect her, but it also meant letting go of something that, against all reason, had begun to feel real. She folded the paper slowly, knowing one choice could ruin him and free her. Her phone lit up with Daniel's name. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat in the quiet, the note on the table between her hands. Whatever she chose, nothing between them would ever be the same again. While Ruth was still debating her next move, Yuna was already setting hers in motion. The high-end club hummed with soft jazz and the clink of crystal glasses, its velvet shadows hiding deals worth millions. She slipped into a private corner booth, crossing her legs with calculated ease. Moments later, a man slid into the seat across from her. His cologne was as expensive as his tailored suit, and his smile carried the weight of power. Daniel will lose the merger, and he'll lose any chance of becoming chairman as well, Yuna said smoothly, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, I'll feed the tabloids the truth, that Daniel and Ruth's engagement was fake. When the press swarms him, he'll have no choice but to defend her and their relationship, because by now, he's fallen hopelessly in love with her. And that's when Han Group will see the truth, that your brother deliberately deceived them, making them believe his engagement to Ruth was real, all to secure their trust and push the merger forward. She leaned back slightly, a glint of triumph in her eyes. Once they realize that, the deal will crumble, and so will he. The man chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Good. But don't mess this up. Yuna's lips curved into a sly smile. I won't. Then, without a word, they leaned across the table and kissed, sealing their unholy alliance. Yuna stood, adjusted her dress, and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and the promise of chaos. Daniel entered the penthouse long after midnight, his tie loosened, the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the distance. He set his tablet on the console table, glancing toward the dimly lit hallway that led to the bedrooms. Ruth's door was closed. He assumed she had gone to bed, and for a fleeting moment, he thought of quietly retreating to his study. So he decided to go to the kitchen to grab a bottle of water, and when he got there, something caught his eye on the kitchen counter. It was a note near a plain envelope. He picked it up, the faint scent of expensive perfume clinging to the paper. The message on it was brief, almost cruel in its simplicity. End it. Make him lose the merger by ending the fake relationship. Daniel will fall with it. He'll lose his position as CEO and any chance at becoming chairman. You'll get your freedom, and you won't keep being used and tossed aside once he gets the chairmanship role. Yuna. Daniel's jaw tightened. His pulse quickened, not out of fear for the merger, but out of something far more dangerous, anger. He could almost hear Yuna's voice, dripping with that calculated charm she always wore like armor. She thought she could use Ruth, to control him? He stood there for a long moment, the note dangling from his fingers, the room feeling colder than it should. After a while, he walked to his study and closed the door behind him. The leather chair welcomed his weight as he leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The logical part of his mind began running through the stakes. The merger with Ghanaianstories Group was the largest deal his company had ever been part of. If it collapsed, the investors would revolt, the board would come for him, and years of work would crumble in days. He would also lose the chairmanship position he had spent years fighting for. But then, unbidden, came the memory of Ruth's laughter earlier that week. The way her eyes softened when she looked at him, not with calculation, not with expectation, but with something genuine. For the first time in years, she had made him feel human. His hand curled into a fist around the note. If the cost of keeping her safe was everything else he'd built, then so be it. There were battles worth losing and people worth keeping. After a while, he picked up his phone and called his stepbrother. When his stepbrother answered, "Brother," Daniel said, "you have won the chairmanship position. Congrats." Then he ended the call. He rose abruptly, pushing the chair back, and left the study. His footsteps were deliberate, quiet, as he made his way to the guest bedroom. He paused at the door, hand resting on the knob, and pushed it open slowly. Ruth was there, curled beneath the covers, her hair spilling over the pillow like dark silk. Her breathing was deep and steady, the kind of peace he rarely saw in her awake. Daniel stood there, drinking in the sight of her, the steady rise and fall of her chest. She had no idea about the storm gathering outside those walls, no idea of the decision he had just made. He stepped closer, careful not to wake her. "You deserve better than this," he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. Her lips moved slightly in sleep, but no words came. He lingered for a moment longer, then straightened, his decision solidified in every bone of his body. He would lose the merger before he lost Ruth. In the hallway, he pulled out his phone, the dim light of the screen casting a pale glow over his face. He dialed. A groggy voice answered on the second ring. "Mr. Lee? Is everything okay? I need you to arrange a press conference for tomorrow morning," Daniel said, his tone leaving no room for questions. There was a pause. Then his assistant seemed to understand what his boss wanted to do. "Sir, the merger. I know I will lose it and my position as the CEO, and also the chance of becoming chairman. But I don't care anymore. She is important." The assistant hesitated, then said, "Yes, sir. I'll have the arrangements made by sunrise." "Good." Daniel hung up, slipping the phone back into his pocket. As he walked back toward his own room, the house seemed less oppressive. The decision had been made. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, scandal, chaos, maybe even ruin. But for the first time in years, he felt certain about something. And as he closed his bedroom door behind him, Daniel Lee allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Tomorrow, the world would know where he stood. By dawn, the headlines had spread like wildfire. Lee Heir's engagement a sham. Source reveals it was a business deal. Yuna's leak had landed exactly as she intended. News anchors dissected every detail. Paparazzi camped outside Kong Group's headquarters, and Ruth's face was splashed across every channel. She lost most of her employees and the last investors who had held faith in her company. But at 10 o'clock sharp, the double doors of the Lee Group press hall opened, and Daniel Lee walked in. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. He stepped to the podium, his expression unreadable. "I won't deny it," Daniel said, his voice steady but low. "The engagement between Ruth Mensah and I began as part of a business agreement to secure a merger between Lee Group and Han Holdings." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "But along the way," he continued, "something happened that wasn't in the contract. I fell in love with her. The kind of love you don't bargain for, the kind you don't fake." The murmurs in the room stilled. "Because of this truth, and my decision to protect her rather than the deal, the merger will not go forward. Also, effective immediately, I am stepping down from my position as CEO of Lee Group." The room erupted into chaos, but Daniel didn't wait for questions. He walked out and headed for the boardroom, the sound of flashing cameras fading behind him. Minutes later, upstairs in the boardroom, shareholders and executives buzzed with disbelief. Some tried speaking to Daniel as he packed his belongings, but the doors opened again. This time it was Chairman Lee, Daniel's grandfather, leaning on his cane, his eyes sharp despite his age. Beside the door stood Daniel's stepbrother, Miho Lee. The old man walked straight to Daniel, stopping only a foot away. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice clear. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Proud?" His grandfather nodded. "This is what a leader should do," the old man said. "A leader is not just decisive and unfeeling. A leader has emotions and the courage to act on them." Daniel let out a slow breath. His grandfather's lips twitched into the smallest smile. "The position of chairman is yours." Daniel blinked. "Due to what I did just now, I think I've lost the merger." When his grandfather heard this, he laughed. "The merger will still be done. I planned this with old man Han, so it will not fall through." Miho clenched his fists when he heard this. The old man stepped over to Miho, lowering his voice. "Don't you do anything else to your brother, or I will kick you out of the family. You are an orphan, and it was his father who made you who you are today." Then he turned toward the door but paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Ruth is a great granddaughter-in-law. You'd better make things right with her." Daniel nodded. Chairman Lee's eyes swept over the stunned shareholders before he left, the faintest chuckle in his wake. Miho followed him out. That same morning, Ruth stood in the penthouse, suitcase open on the bed. She moved through each room slowly, taking one last look. The kitchen where they'd argued over burnt toast, the balcony where he'd kissed her again under the city lights. She zipped her suitcase, dragged it to the front door, and pulled it open, only to freeze. Daniel stood there, a bouquet of deep red roses in one hand, a small velvet box in the other. His hair was slightly disheveled, but his eyes were steady. "Ruth," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. For lying. For making you part of a scheme you didn't deserve." She swallowed hard. "Daniel, you?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "This time no deals. No contracts. Just me. Just you." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the morning light. "If you'll have me." Her breath hitched, emotions warring in her chest. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no calculation. No agenda. Just him. She said yes to his proposal, and he pulled her into a hug. Across the city, Yuna sat on her leather sofa, waiting for the news. Minutes later, the anchor's voice rang out. "Daniel Lee, the CEO of Lee Group, has also taken the position of chairman." The glass slipped from Yuna's fingers, shattering on the floor. She screamed, sweeping the coffee table clean with one arm. "No! How can this be?" Her chest heaved as she stared at the TV screen, her mind racing. She poured another glass, took a long swallow, and muttered bitterly, "Lucky you, Ruth." 2 months later, the world watched as Ruth walked down the aisle, her gown a masterpiece of her own design, the train trailing behind her like a river of silk. Daniel waited at the altar, eyes locked on her as though no one else existed. When the vows were spoken and the kiss sealed, the applause was deafening. The headlines called it the wedding of the year. The chairman of Lee Group and the CEO of one of the most celebrated fashion houses in the world, hand in hand, smiling as if they had never known a single day of scandal. And as the night sky over Seoul lit up with fireworks, Daniel leaned in and whispered in Ruth's ear, "This time it's forever."